Oh, ha! Oh my goodness, there you are. Hey, thank you so much for stopping by and hanging out for a little bit. Really perfect timing. I've got this moment where I'm about to implement some behavior that didn't exist before. And I was hoping we could just kind of walk the stack together and take a look at some of the things that I find important and interesting about it, and hopefully give you a sense, grow your appetites and vocabulary for what I'm trying to do here and what might set that apart. So I'm way down here in a lazy loaded Blazor module, WASM RCL, Razor RCL class library. It sits in the UI section, right? If we collapse some of these, we're chilling in the UI layer of the public library. And so the public library is just a submodule, a mini application that lives within the larger suite of applications that all compose together at runtime to create the experience for our users. So within the public library, we have an entire application set. There's a microservice. It has its own independent data store, at least by default. You could certainly do differently. Uh, but it's also the entire application, like from bottom to top. So we define our business domains out here in the core of the public library. Again, just a pattern within the lazy modules within the larger delivery. These are lazily loaded out here into the UI clients or servers or consoles or Maui's. Oh my, right? You're very, very color by number layouts and a clean answer to every concern that will come up in the life cycle of an application. So anyway, public library, core, and core has unit tests and test data and business domains and domain entities and aggregate roots and uh, specification patterns, domain events and handlers, everything, value objects, everything that makes up the core of generally, not every application benefits this, but most of the applications we build are best served if we describe the core business logic and behavior at the very bottom of the stack and kind of reduce a lot of the rest of the stack to like plumbing. Anyway, so we're going to leave core, and we have our infrastructure layer, and we have our little bit of a side play on a data layer. We can talk about just something to manage migrations and seed scripts and these sorts of things. Application and application shared layers. The application shared is specifically designed to expose an HTTP access client. The application layer exposes a direct data access. Both of these implement an iData service that's defined in application shared, and away we go. Like just a really rich development landscape where everything is very clean and tidy, and a bunch of it you get for free. And when when the 70-80% of the need is met out of the box for free, it frees you and I up to spend a lot of our time focused on what really matters, what makes this build unique and distinct. Yeah, super cool. All right, not we'll visit all of these things real quick and actually pull a piece of code through it. API layer, and finally back to our UI Blazor module, complemented by an admin module, right? So little patterns in here that give us something really, really beautiful and powerful to build upon. So we're chilling in here, building book detail. We hit a point where we wish that data service understood get by ID. That's likely going to take a book get by ID request, and that will require a GUID. But these haven't been built yet. So we're in the UI. We're just like, okay, service, do a thing. Uh, uh, Norm, I'd like to go write some tests now. I think I'll just pull you through the concrete implementations, and then I can do another video on writing some tests. All right. So I need my data service to understand these concepts. What I'm actually going to do We're going to drive down to requests, and in the singular ID of a book, I want to book, single book, get by ID. I'm just going to grab this thing here and say book, get by ID. It is routable. We're going to say it's book, get by ID. ID equals ID. All right, my request objects, I love them for it. We'll see how you feel, but they all honor a very specific formula. The iRoutable that they implement helps them to define what it means within the request object to understand your own routing. So we're going to come down here and build route from return route dot. You're going to need to pass this in. And you're going to do some of that. A little bit of that. And one of these. All right. That should get us our book get by ID request. And now we need the data service to understand this book get by ID. But actually the way we're going to do that is we're going to come back here to core. We're going to look at what these books think they know about the world. I don't have a book get by ID spec, so I'm going to create that real quick. It's going to give us a single book. We need to pass in the ID of that book. We need to decide what we really want here, but for sake of continuing, where the book's ID is equal to the ID we have handed you. Very good. So now that we have a spec and we have defined our request, there's a few things we could pass in here, but nothing comes to mind that we need. We haven't built a controller. We haven't built, and let's actually use our Git here. And we're going to stage what's in flight. So we can now maintain kind of two separate ideas about what's changing. We can always watch that happen. So, so Spaz basically looked at that request, looked at that specification, and was able to go ahead and at least stub up. Most of the time, perfectly fine. You can easily take over the conversation and make some fine, tuning changes and tell her not to regenerate it. You can extend it, tell her to go ahead and keep regenerating the bulk of it. It's up to you. Anyway, we get a nice, clean, exposed query as defined for a mediator request. We get a get by ID query handler to take and turn that query into an execution of that specification. And we see a couple of things going on here that we gotta clean up. So List async, we're not looking for a list, we're looking for a single instance, so we want something different from her there. And again, not a list of book, but a single book is what we're looking for. We get a stubbed map. In this case, it's actually filled in, so it's more than a stub, but you could certainly, again, take over the conversation here, and then she'd let you pick it up from there if you want to do something different. In this case, we're getting a simple map between the request object and the query object that we can use to move between those two. We get a adjustment to the data service and the way I've extended that through partial classes. And so the book partial class data service recognized it needed to add a book get by ID um, to its definition of the contract so that we could enforce that the service is also updated appropriately. Here we see the client data service, which is really just a nice convenient wrapper for any UI client that wants to just use the HTTP client that we've created and well defined and made very easy to interact with. Then that's the way to go. If you don't have access to our code, then you just treat an API like an API. But if you do, then much more intimate experience here. Taking that request object in, using our several other kind of cool patterns to have these named HTTP clients injected and available. Here we see the second thing we want to change. We actually want this to be a getter, not a post. So we can clean that up. And we already talked about the list, so that's cool. That's cool. Not bad. Things I could have probably thought about. We see in our application direct data service the same idea where we're ultimately taking that request, turning it into a query, posting that query um, against mediator so it can go hit the query handler and get us a nice result. In this case, the direct data service is deployed server side. So anytime you wanted to access the system and you did have direct access to the database, this would be the way to go. If you're a disconnected client of some sorts, JavaScript or otherwise, then this would be the way to go. And this could be easily and automatically converted to an expression of a data service layer to match whatever language, right? I've definitely written these in the past for Angular and others. All right, what else do we get? We got a controller. So we got an expression. Again, we noticed in the last file, we want to get, not a post. Get by ID, takes in the request, asks the data service that's been injected into the controller to um, do exactly what we saw. In this case, this is a direct data service because the controller is server side. It has access to the database and is trusted enough to go make that interaction, and we return the thing. This certainly would grow up depending on how these are and who they're for and how they're expressed and why they're available and made, but gets you started. And something super cool about this controller here is in this, we can just go look. There is a complementing book controller. At some point, I've created one. And so any method that is expressed here would the generator will notice. And so if we actually took this method over here and made some changes, then the generator would no longer try to generate it. So it's not what we want to do, but I like them a lot. All right, cool. So at this point, we have two things to fix, rerun spaz, and we actually should be able to now use this idea of get by ID. Like the whole thing has been delivered. Nom, 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 nom. All right, let's look. We were over here trying to get it by ID, so we built the request. Our request needs to know some things. It's a getter, not a setter, and what? I don't feel like the list problem should be occurring. I feel like this is a miss in the specification that we wrote, that it needs to implement iSingleResult. I feel like it's all red out there. So I'm going to rerun spaz, and we'll go back and look at like this book controller gen, and we should see a couple of changes. Now it knows it's a get, and I feel like I should go ahead and say from request here. So I'm going to add that to the request object. We'll watch this controller again. And there you go. So this looks happy, and I'm happy, and we're happy. Now let's go see if we also cleaned up the query handler, I believe, is what we were thinking about. So we could approach the obnoxious color by number sorting and patterns and things I haven't talked about are basically so it's pretty easy to say, hey, I know I need to take a look at and make a change to the infrastructure layer for this lazy public library model. I'm in the infrastructure. I'm looking for a command query on book, right? It's just like, you can close your eyes and know where in the system I'd need to go to affect some sort of change. We were curious about this get by ID. It's no longer a list. That feels like we're heading in the right direction. No longer a list. And a call to first or default instead of get list. Alright, so all of this actually looks pretty good. We're going to go back here to book service. And in the background, the system. It's a pretty small one, actually, but it's kind of fun. Yeah, let's talk about there. But in the background, the system hopefully is basically rebuilding and taking care of itself. Sometimes those wide sweeping changes are a little fast. We'll just give this client a pull, see what's going on. Saw some red go by. Let's see what we frustrated. Do, 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 do. Book get by ID request, line 13. ID is not happy. How do you feel now? Next steps really for this project, other than to continue walking the front to the back to the front to the back and getting the entire thing polished with all of the ideas we have, probably about 70% of the way through that list now, then is to really step back and take all of these signals that have been successfully used to do this. We're going to step to AI. We're going to step to AI in two parts. The first part is, how can the AI help us interview and record and interact with developer, persona A, and in doing so, that the person would be able to describe and talk about and work with the AI, the nouns and the verbs and the system interactions and the boundaries, and really how do we gather enough information about all of those signals that we could communicate those to systems like SPAS that exist that are more manual, right? And then step two is, how do we move over and say, okay, AI, use our expressions of this kit. We have several of these kind of end-to-end, very clean and polished expressions. We can now hand those to her and build little large little large language model additions out of them, and then say, because you're helping host this conversation, you're growing this intimate awareness of the work and what's happening in the system. Now generate it using our answer to every question that's ever going to come up that you would want to in terms of implementing those ideas. And by then, two parts of the whole, we are in fact able to talk our way into building beautiful enterprise stack systems, and her ability to understand existing systems, and in both cases, our ability to help us also really exhaust some amount of useful automated testing and quality control mechanics and predictability of delivery of work, best user stories, update Jira. Who knows where, what that all looks like 10 years from now, but certainly this is cool. Now, if we move over to the thing that is running, because that did work, we pop over here to the public library. We look for a book called Book. Don't know. Boom, boom, boom. Cool. There's books. We got books. You got books. You got books. If we click on a book, we've gone to the history of Blue's Clues, book ID, and we've thrown an error. Let's see what we can learn. Ba-dum-bum-bum. All right. Something about moving through that system isn't happy. So let's grab. Do, 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 do. 5319. Let's see what you know. 5319. Book, get by ID. I need an ID. Looks like I think this is a valid ID. Cannot create an instance of book get by ID request because of bad tabs. Haha, just kidding. So it's upset that we don't offer any parameterless constructor. Cool. We got a book. We got a book. So if we go back over here and hit refresh, looking for this to go away, and looking for some book data. Yay. All right. So that's what it looks like to sort of take ideas and move them through the system. We sort of started in the middle and went back down the stack to get all the way to the heart of some things. If we wanted to go the other way and perhaps affect some of the UI and UI structure here and do different things, this doesn't appear to be taking advantage of the site's uh, look and feel stuff that has been implemented. There's a cool idea around the corner for all of the concerns you could come up with, right? In this case, it's a dance between the Blazor client, which is the thing that lazily loads and renders all the submodules and generally can be seen as quite boring. Not as much going on in the client. It's there to bootstrap and then lazily load everything. That client works in cooperation with a common project that will cook down to RCLs and be loaded not lazily. These will be predictively loaded or preemptively loaded. In the common, we talk about our layout structures and what is the header and the footer and the side nav and how does all of that break down in a large design sense. And both sides of these are looking to a mud static default theme that kind of an implementation of a semi-expression of material design patterns for these Mud Blazer WASM sites, package we've enjoyed. And then these Mud static default themes fire up, get you started, give you some defaults. And then there's an opportunity based on whatever website you're visiting. These domains become very important. So it understands multi-tenancy out of the box. It's been thinking about multi-tenancy for a very long time and does a good job of allowing that to take place, and lots of other wonderful things that come from having such an organized approach and thought out structure that frees us up to try other cool stuff even better. And then, so anyway, those load, and then the business loads and the website loads, and we begin to understand more about where we're at and what we're trying to do. And there is some additional skinning and theming and opinions of co-branded and white labeled and branded and co-branded but locked down because of a parent child relationship between our clients as business entities, and just a lot of thoughts, going into multi-tenancy and how that impacts the idea of co-branding and white labeling design, etc. When you move the other direction into any of the modules that load, they also have a relationship to that common project. So they understand more about what's going on around them, and maybe there's an intimacy, and those master layout pages and these kinds of things are then expressed throughout. And there are some super cool things going on. If we look at that common project one more time, our master pages, hopefully I can find an expression. That's not it. It only has one. Here we go. So here, pretty common, we have this render body tag here, right? Now, body's a render fragment. And so we can make more render fragments. And so if you're a lazy loaded module or a predictably loaded module, you can inject back up into the master page layouts additional sections or render areas of content. And it's a very lovely, lovely situation. And so back down there, all three of those in this one moment, right? Any other module would have its own. If you get into the Blazor module and Blazor module admin patterns, you're going to find they all have an opportunity for their own dub root. So you can lazily inject and clean up, dispose, remove JavaScript and images and CSS that would come with any of those modules when they are rendered and when they do get loaded into the client. Good stuff. We've got other goodies just chilling, like identity server is integrated, so you have role-based security already handled that can integrate dual authentication and social authentication or any other SAML provided like Active Directory, like all marry into one answer that brings it all together and helps us to protect and deliver to our disconnected clients. We've got Signal R chilling in the background, so when we want to, we can let different parts of the application or different submodules are welcome to take advantage of the Signal R system and list visitors into particular rooms, and then allow the Signal R system to do what it does in terms of a bi-directional kind of guaranteed connection between the clients and your server. The lazy and required modules over time are going to get better and better and better to deal with all the boring stuff that every site has to deal with. Like every project we've ever built for the internet needed some database-driven menuing and a co-authoring opportunity with a local site admin can edit the content in the page and the name of the thing in the menu or add new things to them and on and on and on and on. That stuff's boring, and every site needed it, and they need logins and security, and they need known local user accounts, and they need some amount of them need financial pieces, and on and on and on. As you solve for these, they get rolled into these required modules, and these can be expanded upon. These move from project to project quite easily. It's very lovely to be able to just copy this entire thing and dump it into a different project, and away we go, right? It's so good. What else to say? We'll get bored one afternoon and go tidy up the Blazor server pre-render so that we have the best of both worlds. Uh, this is silly, but it's funny, but it's silly and lovely, and so you can tap this whole universe from the console very simply because it's such a clean expression of what's above. When you want to change your UI stuff in the future, like if you want to change apps over the last 20 years, most of everything you'd end up writing in here wouldn't be the stuff that you changed. Right? You might like clean some things up and add some new features, but the big changes have all been really about UI. And in this case, like 5 or 10% of your stack is an expression of it in a particularly chosen UI. Um, it's a good company. Everything cooking down to RCLs. I mean, they fit real lovely into Blazor Server. They fit into Blazor WASM clients. They fit into Maui. And so you can have native expressions of everything you're building here pretty much ready to go in terms of iOS and Android, certainly from a ability to publish those packages. You're going to want to clean a few things up. But if you're doing good mobile responsive, mobile first design across your empire, then you're going to have no problems moving into Maui. That's the kit. You and I hung out for a few minutes and we actually moved through quite a bit of the layers. We moved through the whole stack. We did a few things. I guess we had some help, right? I love my little helper bots, but we made a change in the public library's core business that it would understand through specification how to book get by ID. That then in turn, however you want to talk about it, we have the ability of get booked by ID query and query handler expressed in a way that mediator can understand them. Very, very lovely. Good stuff. Good stuff. We've got our repository of book. Book itself must be an aggregate root to access repository. So good, clean sort of mechanics anyway in the domain layer being honored. We move down a little further. Right. What was the next thing did? We left infrastructure. This didn't really impact our seed data or anything. We hit the application shared layer. We got an auto map, book get by ID auto map to describe how we can easily move between the request and query object because they are essentially the same. The request just happens to contain a little additional information about your route. We created. No, none of this changed. View models are all the same. We didn't change our testing data, but like I mentioned earlier, we would. That'd be a wonderful way to do this. We created the request object for get book ID request, and is that everything? What did I miss? We did our binding, right? Like this is exactly what it looks like to invoke that world if this wakes up. Injected data service, do stuff you know how to do, get booked by ID async. I'm going to hand you a request and you figure it out from there. Your disconnected client in this case uh, isn't having to do very much. I need a request and I'm going to hand it to my service and I don't have the answers to where these come from or why. Well, if we look down here in imports, it's just an injected instance of TPL data service, which comes from our application shared layer. And if we come out here to like this search book page, go back this page, I'm going to play with this ISBN number thing here for a minute, right? It's got responsive UI validation and it stops us from moving forward. Mostly here so we can write some automated UI tests against something and make some little videos and a little program. But um, if we take a look at that, we can see a couple other little cool things, just trying to show some of the UI. Victor really shines in helping organize and think about the higher level of organizing the SAS files and the interpolated CSS patterns in Blazor, and he's really great. I am grateful all the time for Victor in working on these parts and others. Here we're using that Mud Blazer kit we talked about, kind of a little UI kit, and ultimately describing some responsive, material-friendly expressions that begin to integrate with the look and theme engine, and on and on and on. Lots of cool stuff going on. And we see here some pretty simple logic with this for statement. We're actually binding to this book search validator, which is a fluent validator expression up in that shared library, well, the application shared. So the API can get to this project and your disconnected Blazor client can get to this project. Both then sides being able to use this validator to make sure data looks good before going ahead and trying to process it, and providing some good feedback in the error expression as to what failed and what someone might be able to do about it. And this one's kind of fun and complicated. Like, we truly went in and figured out what it took to calculate a valid ISBN 10 or 13, and that was pretty cool. Just, oh, it's such a lovely world to work in. I've been enjoying it way too much, and hope that was helpful. Next time, or probably after this, I'm going to go record building some of those tests. I'll be happy to share that kind of a thing with you. Until next time, cheers. Hope there's something in there for you. Dun, dun, dun.